The sun in the Arizona Territory had a way of baking everything to silence. Even the wind seemed tired, dragging dust across the lonely Dawson homestead as if it barely had the strength to move it. Clara Dawson stood on her porch that late afternoon, hands braced against the rail, watching the far horizon darken with storm clouds. Out here, storms came sudden and mean like most things in life. She tugged the sleeves of her faded blouse lower, tugging until the fabric covered the sensitive skin just above her wrist. The cloth was rough, but she preferred the burn of cotton to the sight of what lay beneath. Scars shiny, curled, reminders of fire. A night she couldn't forget even though she tried every day. Her neighbors in town never looked her in the eye long. Some tried to be polite, but Clara had learned long ago that people could speak kindly and judge harshly in the same breath. "Poor girl," they whispered. "Shame what happened. She won't find a husband now." Others said worse. "Damaged goods. Odd girl. Not right in the head after the fire." Clara heard every word, whether spoken in front of her or murmured the moment her back turned. She had taught herself to be small, quiet as dust, quick as a quail darting under brush. Easier that way. If people didn't notice her, they couldn't hurt her. And if she didn't look in a mirror, she didn't have to see the proof of why she lived alone. Her home was simple, a one-room cabin. She'd rebuilt with her own hands after the fire took the original. Every nail was a promise that she'd keep surviving, even if surviving hurt. She baked her own bread, mended ranchers' coats for a few coins, and took care of a stubborn mule who respected her more than most humans did, but loneliness was a hard companion. It crept in at dusk, when the sky went purple and the sound of families laughing drifted from the town. She tried to ignore it, but loneliness was a patient visitor. That day, as the storm clouds pushed lower over the mesas, she heard hoofbeats slow, steady, confident. Horse hooves, not the frantic scramble of someone running from trouble. Clara stiffened anyway. Visitors weren't common out here. She stepped off the porch and squinted. A horse approached tall, strong, with a coat like polished copper. A rider sat atop it with the ease of someone born in the saddle. When he drew closer, she recognized the style of the beadwork on his reins. The cut of his hair, the posture of a seasoned scout. Apache. She had seen him once in town months earlier, speaking with the sheriff about peacekeeping along the trails. He had kept to himself, silent, unreadable. Even now, as he guided the horse into her yard, he seemed carved from the desert itself, enduring. Patient, calm, he dismounted without a word. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Not from fear. Apache scouts were known for honor and discipline, but from the sheer unexpectedness of him appearing on her land. "Storm comes," he said simply. His voice was low, steady as the ground beneath them. "Your well is nearest." He nodded toward the wooden bucket beside the pump. "May I take water for my horse?" Clara realized she'd been holding her breath. She straightened and nodded. "Of course. Storm or no storm, a traveler shouldn't go without." He studied her, not rudely, not boldly, but with a quiet attentiveness that felt strangely new. Most men looked at her scars first, or tried not to look at them and failed. But he did neither. His gaze lingered on her eyes, her posture, her hands. As though he was weighing something beyond surface, he filled the bucket, let his horse drink, and then glanced at the darkening sky. "I should ride on," he said. "You won't beat the storm," Clara replied. She surprised herself. She didn't speak to strangers this boldly. Lightning could strike the trail. Best wait it out here. A flicker, something like faint amusement, passed over his expression. "You offer shelter to a stranger?" "You're not a stranger," she said before she could stop herself. "You helped the sheriff months ago. People said you were trustworthy." He looked at her a long moment. "My name is Taza," he said simply. "Clara," she replied. The rain began then slow at first, then heavy enough to drum against her roof like impatient fists. Taza led his horse under the lean-to beside her cabin and stood quietly, watching the downpour. Clara found herself watching him not the way townsfolk watched people different from them, but with a quiet curiosity. He didn't stare at her sleeves. He didn't ask about her past. He didn't treat her as fragile. That simple respect unsettled her more than unkindness ever had. For the first time in years, Clara wondered if she had misjudged the world. If maybe not today, not tomorrow. But someday a person might look at her and see something other than a woman hiding her scars. She didn't know then that Taza already had. Clara had not expected him to return. Yet, as morning sunlight cut through the smoky remnants of the storm, Taza was there again, riding slowly along the dusty lane toward her cabin. The rain had left the earth rich and fragrant, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt a flicker of curiosity rather than dread. "Good morning," Taza said, tipping his head slightly. His voice carried the same calm authority as before, but now there was a subtle warmth, as if the storm had softened him in some way. "The trail is wet, but the sun dries fast." "You need assistance with chores?" Clara hesitated. She had long prided herself on independence, on the ability to survive without relying on anyone. Yet something about Taza made her want to answer differently. "If you're offering," she said cautiously, "you can help feed the mule." He's stubborn before breakfast. Taza approached, walking in a measured, purposeful way. Unlike the townsfolk who would have hurried or fumbled, he moved with confidence yet patience, reading Clara's moods as clearly as he read the terrain. He offered no commentary about her appearance, her scars, or her solitude. That silence, she realized, felt safer than all the flattery or judgment she had endured before as they worked. Clara noticed that he asked questions no one else had ever thought to ask. "Who taught you to mend saddles so well?" he asked as he examined the mule's harness. "Why do you walk as if expecting danger?" He observed quietly, his gaze drifting to the cabin's fortified door and reinforced shutters. "Do you fear kindness more than harm?" he asked, pausing with a brush in hand. Clara froze at the last question. She had never spoken aloud the thought that had haunted her for years, that trusting anyone, even herself, could be dangerous. Most men ignored her scars or whispered about them. Taza, however, seemed to read her hesitation, her careful movements, the faint tension in her jaw. I suppose I've learned to survive alone," she admitted softly, unable to meet his gaze. "People judge too quickly, and mistakes. They leave marks." Taza nodded, not with pity, but understanding. "Marks tell a story," he said simply. "They tell who you are, not what you are worth." Clara looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something dangerous and unfamiliar, trust. She feared it, yes, but she also craved it. The way parched earth longs for rain. As the morning wore on, Taza continued to help, yet never overstepped. He respected boundaries, letting Clara lead, letting her decide what to show and what to hide. Sometimes he spoke of the land, of the ways his people read the stars, tracked animals, and healed with herbs. He didn't lecture, he didn't boast. He simply shared knowledge, as if he assumed she might be interested because she was capable, strong, and intelligent. Clara found herself drawn to his quiet steadiness. She could speak of tools, crops, and livestock, and he would respond with interest and insight rather than mockery. Her hands worked more confidently as he watched, as if his attention affirmed her worth rather than diminished it. By noon, the sun had burned off the last of the storm clouds, leaving the air sharp and clear. Clara paused, brushing sweat and grime from her forehead, and glanced at Taza. "You see a lot, don't you?" she asked, half in jest, half in awe. "I see what people hide," he replied, meeting her gaze evenly. "But hiding is not weakness. It is survival." The simplicity of his words struck her. She had lived so long believing her scars were shameful, her solitude a punishment. Yet here was a man who not only noticed her, but understood without judgment. Taza's presence began to change the rhythm of her days. She looked forward to the quiet conversation, the shared work, the understanding that needed no words of pity. It unsettled her, but in a way that felt right, like the stir of wind before a long-awaited rain. By evening, Clara realized something profound. For the first time, she did not feel small, judged, or invisible. Taza had seen her, not the scars, not the rumors, not the loneliness, but her strength, her knowledge, and her survival. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered, if he could see her in this light, perhaps she might one day see herself the same way. The horizon glowed with gold and purple as the sun set behind the mesas. Clara returned inside her cabin, her sleeves still covering the scars, yet her heart felt lighter. Outside, Taza tended to his horse with calm, steady hands, unaware that he had already begun the work of teaching Clara something more important than survival, the courage to be seen, exactly as she was. Clara's mornings had begun to carry a fragile sense of peace. The rhythm of chores, the steady presence of Taza, and the quiet beauty of the desert seemed to promise that perhaps life could be simpler, kinder. She allowed herself to feel it just a little when the first hint of trouble arrived on a blazing afternoon. The sound came faint at first, the uneven clatter of hooves on hard-packed earth. Clara froze mid-sweep, the bristles of her broom suspended above the dirt floor. She recognized that sound instantly, not friendly riders or distant ranchers, but outlaws likely seeking easy prey. Her pulse quickened, her body tightening in a reflex honed by years of surviving alone. She glanced out the window. A small group of men, rough and dusty, rode with confidence and menace, approaching her cabin with the air of ownership. Fear gripped her chest. Her mind raced. She had no gun ready, no backup, no one to call, but she did have Taza, and she had her own hard-won wits. Before she could speak, the door swung open, and Taza was there, moving with the calm precision of a seasoned warrior. His eyes, dark and steady, swept over the approaching riders, reading each one like a map of intentions and weaknesses. Clara felt the tension of the room shift. Suddenly, the fear was not hers alone. It was shared, measured, and tempered by someone she trusted. "They won't find your cabin easy," Taza said, his voice low, almost a whisper, yet carrying authority. "Stay inside." Clara nodded, grateful for his presence but still trembling. She watched as he stepped outside, hands on the reins of his horse, posture relaxed yet ready, a figure of quiet power. The outlaws dismounted carelessly, laughing and shouting as they approached. They clearly expected an easy confrontation with a solitary woman. But Taza didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he planted his feet firmly in the dust and spoke, his voice calm and unwavering. "This land is protected. Leave now," he said. A sneer crossed the face of the leader, a tall man with a crooked nose and a gun slung lazily at his hip. "Or what, stranger?" he jeered. "You and her alone?" Taza didn't answer with threats or curses. He merely moved closer, showing no fear. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife, but his eyes never left the leader. "Or you'll leave empty-handed, and unharmed if you're wise enough." The men laughed at first, thinking him a simple obstacle, until they realized the quiet intensity in his stance, the unwavering patience that made him unpredictable. Taza had learned that confrontation didn't always need gunfire. Presence alone could unbalance even the boldest criminals. Clara, watching from the cabin doorway, felt her chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with something else, relief, respect, and a startling warmth. For the man who didn't just stand between her and danger, he own the space between them with his courage. Moments stretched. The outlaws hesitated. Taza's calm dominance seemed to freeze them in place, a mirror of the desert's own unyielding vastness. Then the leader, recognizing the futility, spat to the ground. "This ain't worth it," he muttered. "Let's go." One by one, the men mounted their horses and retreated, leaving dust swirling in the fading sunlight. Clara exhaled, knees weak, tears prickling her eyes. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to collapse anything to release the tension that had gripped her for minutes that felt like hours. Taza returned to her side, brushing dust from his coat, his expression unreadable. But his eyes softened as he looked at her. "You are safe," he said simply. "For now, and until you no longer fear being alone." She stepped forward impulsively and grabbed his sleeve. "Taza, She couldn't finish. Words felt inadequate. Instead, she did the only thing left. She lowered her sleeves, revealing the scars along her arms and shoulders for the first time to him in their raw, honest entirety. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not wife material, Taza. These scars. They ruin everything." Taza paused, his gaze dropping to her arms, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a quiet reverence. He took a slow step closer, careful not to overwhelm, and spoke with the calm certainty that had driven the outlaws away. "Every scar tells a story. Every mark proves you have survived. I do not see what others see. I see the courage you have carried. That is more than enough." Clara felt a rush of emotion she could not name. Relief, shame, awe, and something like hope swirled together. She realized in that charged moment that Taza had not only defended her home but also begun to defend her spirit, her self-worth, and perhaps, most profoundly, her ability to trust someone again. The sun dipped lower behind the mesas, casting long shadows across the cabin yard. Clara stood, trembling, and Taza offered no words to demand compliance, no rush, no pretense. He simply waited, patient as the desert itself, giving her space to understand one thing, that she was not defined by fear or scars. And that courage often arrived in the form of someone who saw the true value beneath the surface. The air smelled of dust and charred wood from the earlier storm. But for Clara, it felt almost sacred, as if the desert itself had paused to witness what was unfolding. After the outlaws had fled, the sun sank behind the mesas, casting long golden streaks across the Dawson homestead. Clara stood on the porch, sleeves still pulled low over her arms, her fingers twitching as if unsure how to hold herself after the day's terror. Taza approached quietly. The calm authority that had driven the bandits away now focused entirely on her. He didn't rush her, didn't comment on the exposed scars she had reluctantly revealed. Instead, he studied them with a quiet reverence that startled her. "Your body," he began, his voice low and steady. "These marks, they do not hide you. They speak of what you have endured, of what you have survived." Clara blinked, unprepared for the gentleness in his words. She had spent years imagining that her scars made her broken, unworthy of companionship, unfit to be loved. Every man who had looked at her before had seen something to pity or reject. But Taza saw differently. He stepped closer, careful to respect her boundaries, and gently lifted the edge of her sleeve as if asking permission rather than taking it. She froze for a heartbeat, then nodded, trusting the quiet honor in his eyes. His fingers traced the faint ridges of her scars, not with curiosity, not with lust, but with solemnity. "In my people's ways," he said softly, "a scar is not weakness. It is a story. It is proof that you have lived, that you have fought, that you have survived. These are not flaws, they are strengths." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way. No one had ever offered her the radical acceptance that Taza now held between his hands, a silent vow that her past did not diminish her, that her body did not define her worth. Why? Why do you see it differently? She asked, voice trembling. Everyone else? They see only damage. Taza straightened slightly, letting his hands fall to his sides, though his gaze never left hers. Because most people see what they fear, he said simply. They fear suffering, they fear loss, they fear what they cannot control. You have endured all these things, and yet here you stand. That makes you strong. That makes you worthy of respect, of life. And of love, if you allow it. Clara swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. The idea that she might be seeing not despite her scars, but because of the strength they represented, was both terrifying and liberating. She had spent so long hiding, protecting herself from judgment, that the thought of allowing someone to see her fully was almost unbearable. Yet here was Taza, offering her a chance she hadn't dared to imagine. He stepped even closer, never rushing, never forcing, only waiting for her consent. These scars, he said, voice gentle, they are not a curse. They are proof. Proof that you survived fire, survived fear, survived the judgments of others. And I honor every one of them. His words, spoken with such care and conviction, washed over her like a cool river in the desert heat. For the first time, Clara felt that maybe, just maybe, her scars did not make her unworthy. They made her human, resilient, remarkable. Taza extended his hand. A simple gesture, and she took it hesitantly. It was steady, warm, grounding. And in that touch, Clara felt an unspoken promise. She was seen, she was valued. And her past did not define the entirety of her story. For hours. They sat on the porch together, the sky darkening overhead, sharing stories of survival, of hardship, of lessons learned in the harsh wilderness. Taza spoke of Apache teachings, of how wounds, whether seen or unseen, were to be honored, understood, and integrated into one's life. Clara shared bits of her own story. Careful at first, then with growing courage. Trusting him with truths she had never spoken aloud. By the time the moon rose, Clara felt something she hadn't in years, a quiet peace, a deepening trust, and the first flicker of hope that she might be capable of being seen fully and loved entirely. Taza's presence, his respect for her scars, had begun to mend something deeper than the physical marks. They had begun to heal her spirit. That night, as she prepared for bed, Clara lingered at the window, looking out at the desert. The scars were still there, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. But now, they were no longer a source of shame. They were reminders of survival, of resilience, and of a man who saw the strength in every battle she had fought. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be fully, unapologetically herself, and perhaps, one day, share that self with someone who truly understood. The next morning felt different. The same pale sunlight stretched across the desert, the same mule brayed impatiently for breakfast, the same wind pressed against her cabin walls, but Clara felt changed in a quiet, unfamiliar way. It wasn't dramatic, not some wild burst of confidence or sudden transformation. It was gentler than that. It was the feeling of being seen, and not recoiling from it. Taza was still at her homestead, tending his horse with the same disciplined grace as always. You ride into town today? He asked without turning. He already knew. Clara tended to ride into town once every 2 weeks for supplies, always keeping her trip brief, always lowering her gaze to avoid lingering looks. Yes, she replied, her voice steady. I need flour and kerosene. And some nails. Taza's eyes flicked to her sleeves. She wore them down, as always. She wasn't ready to change everything at once, and he never pushed. I ride with you, he said. Many miles, many dangers. Clara smiled faintly. Are you worried about outlaws? I am worried about the way people look at you, he said simply. You shouldn't face that alone. His words hit deeper than she expected. The ride into town, they made the trip in silence at first, the desert stretching before them in vast shimmering waves of gold and brown. Clara's hands tightened around the reins more than necessary. Old habits, old fears. But each time her heartbeat spiked. She felt Taza's calm presence at her side, a steadying force she hadn't realized she needed. As they neared the town, she heard the usual sounds, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the rickety churn of wagon wheels, the distant laughter of children. But this time, Clara didn't feel the familiar urge to shrink into herself. Not with Taza beside her. He wasn't loud. He wasn't boastful. He didn't make himself big to intimidate others. He simply existed with such quiet confidence that it made space for her to breathe. When they reached the general store, people noticed. They always noticed Clara, but this time their eyes slid to Taza too. Some stiffened. Some whispered. Some were openly curious. But none dared say aloud the remarks they usually muttered. Tiazia dismounted beside her, scanning the street with a calm, unreadable expression. His presence alone discouraged cruelty. Clara stepped inside the store. Heart pounding but determined. Mr. Higgins. The storekeeper, with a kind face and a habit of talking too much, looked up with surprise. Morning, Clara, he said warmly. He glanced at Taza, uncertain for a moment but polite. And to your friend as well. Taza nodded. Morning. Something about the exchange grounded Clara. Confronting the past, Clara gathered her supplies: flour, nails, 2 bottles of kerosene, and stood in line to pay. Behind her, she heard hushed voices. That Dawson girl. Poor thing, still hiding them scars. She keeps to herself. Strange, isn't it? Clara felt the familiar sting rise in her throat. The urge to run, to hide, to disappear back into the desert. She almost slipped back into her old habits. Almost. But then Taza stepped close enough that she could feel his presence at her back. He didn't speak. He didn't confront. He didn't need to. Clara straightened. For the first time, she turned around, faced the whispering women, and said calmly, I survived a fire. It left marks. But I'm still here. The women froze, wide-eyed, startled not by her scars, but by her voice, firm, steady, unapologetic. Taza said nothing. But Clara saw the faintest hint of pride in his eyes, a small victory that felt like a war won when she left the store. The sunlight seemed brighter. Clara mounted her mule without trembling. She didn't hide behind Taza or wait for him to speak for her. Thank you, she said quietly as they rode out of town. For what? He asked. For not speaking for me, for being beside me, for seeing me. Taza nodded once. You speak like someone who knows her worth, he said softly. That is the beginning. The beginning. Clara let the words settle inside her. For years, she had lived in the aftermath of a tragedy, believing her story had ended in flames and ashes. But riding back toward her homestead, with Taza beside her and a new courage under her ribs, she realized something. Her story wasn't over at all. It was just beginning. The wedding took place at sundown, when the desert softened into a warm, golden hush and the whole world seemed to hold its breath. The San Carlos Mesa glowed like hammered copper, and a gentle wind drifted through the canyon, carrying the scent of mesquite smoke and juniper. It was the kind of evening that made a person whisper instead of shout, as though disturbing the peace would insult the beauty around them. Margaret stood on a high ridge with Lonato, her hand resting in his. She was wearing a simple buckskin dress the women helped her make, nothing fancy, nothing too fine, but it fit her like it belonged to her, like she belonged to the land itself. Her scars were not hidden. Not a single one. For the first time in her life, She didn't want to hide them, because she'd learned something here, something Lonato had been trying to show her from the beginning. Scars weren't signs of being broken. They were signs of having survived and survival. As the Apache elders said, was a kind of honor. Below them, the village gathered, children with their hair braided in bright strings, mothers with painted cheeks, old men who watched everything with patient eyes. A small fire crackled at the center, and the flames danced like they, too, were celebrating. Margaret found herself breathing a little faster. All these people, they're here for us? For you, Lonato corrected, voice low and certain. To show that you are welcome, that you are already part of us. She glanced down, overwhelmed. A year ago, these people wouldn't have even looked at me, she thought. A year ago, I didn't even look at myself. The ceremony began with blessings, gentle words spoken by the elder woman, Sina, whose wrinkled hands were strong enough to braid a new horse rope in minutes. She held a small pouch of pollen and touched it lightly to Margaret's forehead, then to Lonato's. May you walk in beauty, Sina said. May your home be strong. May your heart stay open. Then came the exchange of offerings. Margaret stepped forward first. She had nothing fancy to give, nothing bought, nothing valuable. But she had a small wooden carving she'd been working on in secret for weeks, a tiny horse, its mane flowing back, shaped from a scrap of desert pine. It wasn't perfect. The legs were a little uneven, the muzzle slightly crooked, but it was made by her hands, her real hands, hands she could finally look at. Without shame, she offered it to Lonato with a shy, almost trembling smile. It's not much. Lonato cupped her hands around the carving. It is perfect. Like its maker. Heat rushed to her cheeks, and before she could say anything, he offered his own gift. Around her neck, he placed a necklace he had woven from soft leather and turquoise beads. At its center hung a small silver charm, a sunburst, hammered smooth by fire and stone. It means new beginning, he whispered near her ear, and I intend to give you one every day. The people cheered softly, no loud clapping, no rowdy shouting, just warm, approving voices rising like a blessing into the dusky sky. Margaret blinked hard, but the tears still came. Not of pain, not of fear, but a finally feeling worthy. Lonato lifted her hands to his lips. Every scar, every healed cut, every reminder of the woman she had once been. He touched them with reverence, sealing each with the gentlest kiss. You said you weren't wife material, he murmured. But you were wrong. You are strong, loyal, brave. You see people. You heal them. You heal me. She swallowed. And you? You made me believe it. The ceremony ended, but the celebration had only begun. Drums echoed across the mesa, steady and warm. Children ran in circles. Women brought out venison stew, roasted corn, sweet bread. Margaret really laughed when the girls tugged at her sleeves, asking her to join their dance. For the first time, she did. Under the rising moon, she danced barefoot in the dust, her scars shining faintly in the firelight. Lonato watched her with the softest expression, the kind of look a man gives only once in his lifetime. Later, when the music quieted and the village began settling down, Lonato pulled her close. The wind was cool now, brushing against them like a blessing. Margaret, he said softly, are you happy? She leaned her forehead to his. I'm finally myself, and that is happiness. The night wrapped around them, calm and steady. The stars shimmered like tiny white fires. And hand in hand, they walked toward their new home, two people who had healed each other, believed in each other, and chosen each other. A woman who'd once said, I'm not wife material. And a warrior who had shown her one scar at a time that she was so much more. The end. If you want a new story, new outlines, or a spicier or gentler version, just tell me.